MMA retirements are rarely fun. In fact, I would say that the sport is set up in a way that really doesn't help its legends to bow out gracefully. The old are generally fed to the young. The star power of the aging veteran will be eventually used to build a rising prospect. And though the MMA retirement of Joanna Jędrzejczyk wasn't quite that simple, to say that her final moments in the cage were upsetting would be putting it lightly. For as long as it lasted, Zhang vs Jedrzejczyk II was actually a lot of fun, building off the insanity of their first bout with a thrilling opening round that, while really a showcase for Weili Zhang's immense physicality, still contained within it some strong moments for Joanna. But in that second round, things took a turn for the ugly, as Zhang, using the sidekick that she had been repeatedly going to as a setup, fired off a picture-perfect spinning back fist, one that connected cleanly on its target, putting Joanna out there and then, and it was a nasty loss. After such a long layoff, coming off a frankly ridiculous 5-round war with that very same fighter in Weili, who then beat her again in the comeback and her rematch. Yeah, it was always going to be an uphill climb for Joanna, and I do wonder whether some more lenient matchmaking would have served her better, because even if she has those losses to Rose Namajunas on her record, Weili Zhang is a truly remarkable fighter for the 115-pound weight class, a supremely talented athlete whose physicality is pretty much unmatched in that division. But either way, that was the fight that Joanna got, and after this loss, she surprised the world by calling it a day on her MMA career, and so the longest serving strawweight champion leaves the sport. And while there is certainly a discussion to have over where this victory leaves Weili Zhang in relation to a title shot, for today's video I'd rather look over Joanna's legacy, or to be more specific, to ask ourselves exactly where it is that she fits within the women's MMA GOAT conversation. I think people tend to forget just how impressive Joanna was during that 5-fight streak of defenses at the top of the strawweight pile. And I also do get the sense that some of her best wins have been swept aside to some extent, because of her opponents either hitting a wall or dropping out of the sport entirely. But when you look at some of the names she has picked up over the years, it's pretty damn impressive. 2 wins over Claudia Gadelha, who, lest we forget, was an excellent contender in her day, a TKO of Carla Esparza, a masterfully brutal barrage from Jędrzejczyk that ended up winning her the belt from the first champion of the division, a fighter who would go on to reclaim it 7 years later. Karolina Kowalkiewicz certainly dropped off in a big way, going 0-5 in 5 fights, on a run that began with a very violent one-punch KO loss to Jessica Andrade, but she was also pretty damn good in her day as well. A win over 5 rounds against Jessica Andrade was perhaps one of the most surgical victories on her resume, against a fighter who would be crowned champion just a few fights later. Then you have victories over the likes of Michelle Waterson, Tecia Torres, and an excellent one over the very underrated Jessica Penne. But I suppose the question here is, which one is Joanna's signature victory? Is it the title clinching beatdown of Esparza? Or do we think that this earlier version of Carla was some ways short of the fighter she would eventually become? The Gadelha victories were quite nice as well, ending a pretty heated rivalry and overcoming in the process a sharp stylistic contrast. Jessica Andrade over those 5 rounds might be my pick, but I'm not 100% sure. When you look at just how often the title at strawweight has changed hands, it makes it clear that her consistency is probably her biggest strength in this regard. 5 defenses in any division is a milestone that is incredibly difficult to come by, and I think that, coupled with the bar she set as a technical striker, these are really the main strengths that make Joanna's resume what it is. On a quick side note, if you're enjoying this content and would like to stay up to date with all of our weekly uploads, be sure to subscribe to the channel now, because we are without question the boogie woman of MMA YouTube. We also have a Patreon account, so if you want to help in supporting the channel, the link is in the description. So what are her primary drawbacks? Well, going 0-2 against both Weili Zhang and Rose Namajunas does say a lot about where Joanna stood in relation to the next generation. She was not miles off the competition, but she simply couldn't get the results. Indeed, her heyday had been had to some extent by the time Rose took her belt, but I do think that her 5 losses, those 4, and the one against Valentina Shevchenko, albeit at flyweight, do take away from her resume in relation to the others who would occupy a spot within this top 5. Would I say that Joanna has a win as good as Weili's win over her, or Rose's victory over her, or the 2 that Rose has over Weili? Because when you put together a top 5 women's MMA GOAT list, you have to pick Amanda Nunes, you have to pick Chris Cyborg. Then there's also Ronda Rousey, who, if you love her or hate her, cannot be ignored. Valentina Shevchenko would be the obvious next entry, and I'll point out that these are not in any particular order at this time. So the question becomes, does Joanna get into that top 5 ahead of Holly Holm, ahead of Miesha Tate, ahead of Gina Carano, or even Weili Zhang? I suppose the hardest question to answer is whether she will get in ahead of Rose Namajunas. I know her last fight well and truly sucked, but when you remove that strange defeat and the even stranger slam KO at the hands of Jessica Andrade, Thug Rose has managed to do the double on both Weili Zhang and Joanna. And if we're to say that those three fighters are in contention for the honour of 115-pound GOAT, her head-to-head results against both of these fighters cannot be ignored. Now, I don't know if I can put Rose in ahead of Joanna. It just doesn't feel right for some reason. Perhaps it's the longevity of her run as champion compared to Namajunas, plus the fact that we're all still a bit confused by Rose and her last outing. But then again, we just watched Jędrzejczyk get sparked. So on paper, Namajunas should be the pick. She's the only champion in UFC history to recapture a title within the women's divisions. And her best moments, I would say, eclipse those that Joanna reached. But title defenses are pretty damn important. And as we've already established, I think quite highly of Joanna and her title reign, the opponents that she has beaten. I do think there's a lot to be said for one strong, bar-setting run, a long period of time spent as champion. Look at Ronda Rousey. Indeed, her run was longer and more decisive, but even her shocking decline hasn't ruined my assessment of her peak. And I think with Joanna, while her decline has not been so pronounced, if anything, she's been pretty damn effective in there for the most part. I think that looking at her career as a whole is making it easier to criticize and take away from her GOAT pick because of those losses, because of the natural progression of her rise and eventual fall. And we don't have that from Rose Namajunas just yet. By the time she retires, though she will be at least a two-time champion, maybe she will take some vicious losses, hitting a real low point in the sport before hanging up her gloves for good. And that's kind of what has happened with Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And for that reason, I'm going to give Joanna a spot in the top 5. Her career is over, and it can be seen and appreciated for all of its ups and downs. I'm not totally confident in saying that I will feel the same even 6 months from now, but Joanna was a trailblazing force within the 115-pound division, and she looked totally unstoppable up until she didn't. But where would you place Joanna, if anywhere, within a top 5 GOATs of women's MMA? Do let us know your opinions in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and a comment before subscribing to the channel so you can stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. Thank you for watching.